Hi, I used to use Photoshop for digital illustration, and a little while ago I switched to using Manga Studio 4, and now I'm using Manga Studio 5 just about exclusively. But I've got 100 specialist brushes in Photoshop and Manga Studio 4, and how do I get those into Manga Studio 5? Well, I'm going to show you how I've been doing it. It's it's not the easiest of process. If you don't really want to go through that and you'd like to get hold of some Manga Studio 5 brushes, then I've actually made a number of both Manga Studio 4 and Manga Studio 5 brushes available at my DeviantArt site, www.888toto.deviantart.com. So you can find brushes there. But if you want to convert the ones you've got, this is the process that I use. The important thing to realize is that any brush has got two elements to it. It's got a bunch of settings that you have to set, and it's got a shape. The settings you really just have to make a note of, and then type in the nearest equivalent settings in Manga Studio 5. But I'll try and point you at the ones you need to take the most care of, and then there's the shape. Now, about half of the brushes that you've got will be just based on a circle, and if it's a circle, then you don't need to bring that shape over. There's a circle already available in Manga Studio 5 for your brushes. So you only need to worry about the shapes for the complicated shapes. Let's have a look at Manga Studio 4, and then later on I'll show you also the process through for converting Photoshop brushes. And we'll start off with something with one of those circle ones. So if you look at the standard pen set in as opposed to the pattern brushes, the pen sets and the pencil set and the marker set are really these are all based on standard shapes like the circle, mainly the circle. So what is it that you need to look at? Not a lot. The size of the brush, that's a simple and obvious thing. But the only other major thing is the way that it works with a pressure sensitive tablet, and that's what really makes the various pen types have a realistic feel to them. So if you click the little circle next to the word size, then you get the settings for the brush, and you see it's almost straight. It's a slight curve for a G pen, but in Manga Studio 5 you get a G pen, no problem there, but you don't get a Maru pen. So if I want a Maru pen, just look at it, check that, and see that it's a very much more exaggerated shape with a long tail bottom. And what that does is it allows you to get this very wide range of line widths, which is actually quite similar, maybe even to a sable brush. So if you go over to Manga Studio 5, copy the G pen, and then well, let's go to that now. There. So we find that G pen is there, and we click this little spanner on the tool properties, and that gives the advanced tool properties, and under the brush tip we see a number of settings, but But under the size, brush size, if you take this little box at the end of the brush size, there's that shallow curve that you get with the G pen, and if I just pulled that out, something like that, then that will be much closer to a Maru pen. Or in fact, you can add extra points and really set it almost exactly like that Maru pen. Okay. Let's try and get us back to where it was. And that's what I've got. I've now got a Maru pen here in Manga Studio version 5. So, when you're looking at settings, there may be 50 different settings. You might be worried of which ones I have to worry about. These are the main ones you're going to worry about. If it's a circular shape, then you're going for brush size, which in Photoshop is the diameter. Manga Studio 4 is called the size. Make a note of that. The opacity, it's usually 100%, but it may be something less that the brush you're interested in. They all call it opacity. Same with hardness. Quite often there isn't a hardness setting. Some kind of brushes don't have hardness settings, but if there is one, you may make a note of that. And the spacing is important. That's the spacing between the individual little shapes that make up the line. It's called space in Manga Studio 5. It's called spacing in Photoshop, and it's called interval in Manga Studio version 4. And it's worth looking at whether there are any airbrush settings in Photoshop or Manga Studio 4. You may not want to bother taking the settings down, but at least it tells you that there are airbrush settings, and you'll have to play with the airbrush settings in Manga Studio 5. And effectively, if there's any settings, it means it's probably that the shapes are being scattered a bit on the page. If it's a if you're interested in the pressure settings, obviously you need to make a quick sketch of that and then copy that over. Now, if it's not based on a circle, then in addition to the stuff above here, you also need to record a particular property about the direction of the brush. You're going to look at direction in Manga Studio 4, or the equivalent of that is the angle jitter in Photoshop. And if there is an angle jitter, then it's the equivalent of random direction in Manga Studio. But there's also another setting that's in Manga Studio, but I'll show you that in a moment. So going back to Manga Studio 4, let's get rid of that. Look at the direction on the pen, and here we see that the direction can be none, or it can be the stroke direction, or it can be random. It's probably better to look at a pattern brush and make more sense. Yeah, direction. Pen direction could be none. It could be one of the others. Some of the others almost the same as none. The ones that are significant are stroke direction and random. So this particular heart one here, if I make the interval short, so it's going to make more of a line. Let's see what happens. So with none, it's appearing straight up like that. If I switch that direction to stroke direction, then it follows the line of the pen. And if it's random, then it's random. There we go. And that's an important thing to note for shapes that are not circles. and if it's got any scatter or density. So if this doesn't, it means so I know it's not I don't need to do any airbrush settings effectively when I bring it over. So I want to capture one image of this shape. So to make that easy, I'm going to increase the interval to something slightly over 100%, and then it's easy just to capture a single image. But I don't want it random. Let's get back to none. That's it. Maybe get the size a bit bigger. There we go. So I've got a few brushes, and I could put lots on the page here, but and then I'm going to bring this image into Manga Studio 5 and make brushes from these. But on the way this time, I'm going to also load in some Photoshop brushes so you can see how that works. So let's save this picture, which as you see is just a single color layer. I'm going to save that as a Photoshop file. So for that I go to Export, Image File, Pixels. I've got this set to Output at Actual Size. I've set the type down here to Photoshop. It could be any of these, but this makes it a little easier, as you'll see as we go on. And then I'm going to save this. I've given it a name of Brush Move. Okay. So now let's go into Photoshop and load that in. And there it is. Zoom in a bit. Probably zoomed in too much. Okay. So let's see about loading in one of the Photoshop brushes that I want. And I'm going to load this one here, which is a picture of some lightning. There it is. And now I'll save it back in. That's it. Finish with Photoshop. Now I just go to Manga Studio 5 and I open the same file. Brush Move. Alright. So here they are. Now if I register any of these shapes in Manga Studio, they're not going to work quite right, because this is, at the moment, these things are sitting here on this layer, which is a color layer. If I make a brush out of something on a color layer, then whenever I paint with it, it'll only paint in the color that it was when I saved it. So this heart will only ever paint in red. This lightning will only ever paint in black, even though lightning I'd always want in white. So I'm going to have to do something about that, and what I have to do is to turn this into either a monochrome layer or a grey layer. I'd prefer a grey layer. It works better with the Manga Studio 4 brushes. So on the layer palette I click the top left corner and I change this layer. I go to Convert Layer. There it is, it's a raster color layer, and I'm going to change it to grey. Right, if I hide that base layer, you'll see that the Manga Studio ones are opaque. You can't see through them. They may have white in them or grey, but they are effectively using both the foreground and the background colour. The Photoshop brush typically is just black, maybe black and a bit of semi-transparent grey. That's what happens with Photoshop brushes, because they only use the foreground colour, most of them. Okay, so let's make some lightning out of this now. So I go to the shrink selection. I'll make it more visible to you here, and I'm going to just draw a big area around that. And there we are. It's selected around the lightning. I'm then going to go to Edit, Register Image as Material, and there it is. And I'm just going to type in here a name for it. I'll call that Flash. I have to click this button, or in the bottom corner here, this little box, Use for Brush Tip Shape. Where do I store it? So I'm going to put it under Image, Material, Brush, and I'm going to give it a little tag so I can find it more easily. So I give the same tag to all my brush shapes. Okay, so I've registered the shape in there. What do I want now from it? Then I think I want to create a brush from it. So I can pick any brush, really, any brush at all as the base of it for it. So I'll take this one here, and I'm going to right click on that box and select duplicate subtool. There it is. And I write here Flash, and there's my brush. It's called Flash, but of course it's the wrong shape because I haven't yet associated it with the lightning picture. So for that I'm going to go to Brush Tip. I select this little drop down list here, and they appear there. I go and find it. There it is. And there's them. There's the thing, but it's not quite what I want. So this is where I have to just do a few changes to the settings. So the brush size has to be bigger for this. It was in lots of different directions. I want it just to be the same straight down look, so I want the direction not to keep changing. So I'm going to go to Brush Tip, Direction. At the end of the direction thing there's a little box. I click on that, and there it is. It was random. I switched that off so it's just none, and that's it. The brush should work. So if we just make the background dark so we can see our lightning against it. Set the pattern, the palette, set the thing to white. There's my brush. There's my lightning. Ta-da! So that's how you convert a Photoshop brush. But it's exactly the same process to go through to take any of these other ones. I can make a shape and make a brush from it. Okay, well, I hope that was some help. Bye.